Hey everybody, it's Matthew. Here is the second half of our AMA. Ask me anything, ask us anything with Brian and Alice and me. In this section, we answer some very pointed questions from Cameron, and then we surprise one another with our own questions. I think it's a lot of fun. Hope you enjoy. Okay, we've gotten to... Cameron sent in two extremely targeted questions for Alice and for Brian. Who wants to go first?
Bring it. I'm ready. What does he got?
So this is Cameron's question to Brian. How do you feel that having denied the beauties of complex modernist poetry because of something called effort or difficulty, that you will never experience the joy of such poetry, and that you will live your life in a pessimistic haze where the great modernists shall never intrude?
This is such a clown question. What a gonzo, insane thing to ask somebody. Like, first of all, I don't live my life in a pessimistic haze. There's full of joy and beauty. Like, I love my sons and wife.
Do you hear this? He's full of joy and beauty.
I have friendships. I experience art, and the idea, the question here, if I heard right, he's saying specifically modernist poetry is the issue. So that's like Yeats and Wallace Stevens and Ezra Pound. I need to read these people to elude my pessimistic haze. Also, I have read more modernist poetry than 99.9% of human beings. Does that make everyone is living in some sort of pessimistic world? And also, of the T.S. Eliot that I have read, does that lead to great optimism? Are all the people you know who have spent their lives reading A Wasteland just walking around with seeing the beauty in life? It's so insane. I read the shit out of James Joyce when I was an 18 to 23 year old, and I've read it. I read it all. I read the stories, and I read the oddball play, and I even spent years trying to figure out Finnegan's Wake. And that makes me that led to optimism. I read it now, and I'm like, oh, I could see why a 19-year-old would spend a lot of time reading this stuff. But I was far more pessimistic as a 19-year-old than I am now.
Shots fired. Cameron just turned 19.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah.
Oh, look at that. Look at that. You see? So, God, there's nothing worse than saying you just think that way because you're young. That was not at all my intention. I assume that as a 41-year-old, Cameron will equally judge those around him who have not read modernist poetry. But I just, the thought that he's not questioning, because the sensible question here would be like, don't you feel you're missing out on a deeper type of joy because you're not willing to put the work in to experience it? And that I'd be like, yeah, that's probably true. Like, my life probably is devoid of that deeper type of joy because right now the energy I'm spending on to experience that deeper type of joy is more in the family realm than in the artistic or intellectual realm. But specifically, the lack of modernist poetry leaves me in a pessimistic haze. I can't believe that a serious man would ask that as a serious question. So that's the shot I want to fire, not whether he will continue to think this in 20 years, because God knows if any of us will continue to think anything in 20 years.
There's a version of this question that I can sympathize with more, but it tends to come in the other direction. Like when it became clear that I'd see colors badly enough that I will never be like a painting critic. My dad was like genuinely upset that I didn't appreciate Mark Rothko. It's like, of all of the joys and beauties in the world, like Mark Rothko's paintings, like I'm sure I am missing something, but also like that's not the biggest loss. But clearly it's partly because like he was a really important painter to my dad, and so like it meant something to him growing up, and then like he was hoping to be able to pass that on to his child. But it is, I mean, Cameron is precocious in so many ways, but I guess he's also precocious in like feeling bad for young Brian, who's never learned to appreciate the joys of the high modernists. Or who's insufficiently learned to enjoy them. But
my nonsense shtick aside, do you really think that the writer of this question feels that modernist poetry is what prevents humanity from experiencing pessimism? That human beings who do not have access to, and again, we can expand it from modernist
Sure,
poetry, but
sure.
like from sophisticated literary texts, are suffering in some way.
Yeah, I think you're attached. I think you're attaching too much importance to his use of the word pessimistic. I read that not because the modernists he thinks the modernists fill one with optimism, but because there's such a source of pleasure that if you imagined a world without them, there would be so much less pleasure in the world that it would seem like a bleak and lonely place.
But that really does suggest that, I mean, 99.9 is way too small a number. Like, does that, does he really feel like some percentage of some tiny, tiny, tiny basis point of human life just cannot reach the degree of pleasure that those who read this type of sophisticated poetry experience?
I think he sees you, Brian, as a young man who shows promise, and being able to attain a degree of like sophistication and understanding that he has already enjoyed since he was 14, and that like you seem capable of coming to appreciate it, and so it's sad that you don't fulfill your potential. I think
Well, I
that's fair.
apologize. I'll try to do better. I promised.
I do think. I mean, Cameron is like such a. And I've got we've got a thing we're planning soon, but uh, he really lives in poetry in a way that I think very few people do. Like he really swims in it and breathes it, and it's his whole. I don't know. I mean, I don't know him well enough to say it's his whole life, but one gets the impression at times that it's his whole life. All right, Alice, your hostile and personally targeted question from Cameron is for Alice mainly, since she writes more free verse. Do you think that poets who write free verse should have as great a knowledge of metrics as a formalist poet should? Eliot, no escape except mastery, etc. And I should say that in a recent episode of Poetry Says, you mentioned this question coming up in conversation with another poet and getting a very decisive answer.
Did I?
Yeah, I think you were talking to one poet about a conversation you had had, but you said it was with maybe Pam Brown, maybe, or it was like one
Ah,
of your
yes.
female icons, but it was like the question was like, oh, should we? Oh no, it wasn't. It was Bernadette. I mean, it may have been Bernadette Meyer
Maya.
who said,
Maya, yeah. Mm.
well, yeah. Would you relate that?
Yeah, so Bernadette Mayer was talking to Al Filreis, and they had a question from somebody which was basically the same thing. Like, but she was coming at it from a different angle, saying, "I've just started out with this stuff, but do I need to learn my scales first before I just go writing whatever the hell you're writing, Bernadette?" And Bernadette Mayer just said, "No, you don't need to do that. You don't need to worry about that 19th century stuff." Um, I want to say more, but I just need 2 minutes.
Okay,
Can
yeah,
I?
yeah,
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 don't
yeah.
say
Go ahead.
anything important.
Yeah, all right. We will sit in silence.
And this question comes up often with painters, right?
Mm,
Visual artists who choose not to depict characters in realistic ways,
right,
and
or even
often,
characters at all.
right, and often the question is like a 2-year-old could do it, is somebody would say, and
Right.
then a response not particularly compelling in my mind, but one you often hear is that, but this artist is choosing to do that. You see, in his earlier works, he was a master draftsman who could, you know, make you think you were
Right.
looking at a photograph. And I've never quite known where I landed with that. Like, does it matter if Jackson Pollock could draw a banana that looks exactly like a banana or not? It's a
He wasn't
slightly
a
different.
photorealist, but he was a pretty capable draftsman. Like he did
He
write.
he was he was
Yeah,
a
he
pretty
did
capable
realistic, yeah,
craftsman,
drawing and
right? I mean, but Picasso is the one a lot of people talk about
sure.
because before he did cubist stuff, he did hyperrealist stuff, you know, and there are other examples, obviously. But my question is, for Matthew and Alice, both of you, is like, one, does the painter need to be an expert draftsman in order to somehow earn credibility for his splatter paintings? And two, is it a useful analog to the poetry world?
My brother would have a very strong opinion about this. I think he would say yes. But I think they're different. There's sort of several different elements to this. So Brian was asking about a similar question with visual artists doing representational work or what they call figurative work, and learning your scales or learning all of your formal techniques. But you combined a number of different considerations. One is the question of difficulty. Like, if my kid could do it, is it still good? Which I think, like, my kid could do it is not actually a good argument, but it can sometimes be a good way to deflate pretension. Like, it's not like, if your kid could do it and it's really good, then no, who cares? Well, who cares whether your kid could do it? But like, my kid could do that can sometimes be a way to like take the air out of a room in which people are all pretending to see something. But
right. I mean, there's the Emperor's New Clothes side of
right,
my kid
exactly.
But there's also like along with postmodernism comes the importance of the explanation as much as the art itself. So a kid being able to do it doesn't mean anything because the kid can't contextualize it within the history of art in the way that matters to an artist, whether he's putting a urinal on a wall or splattering paint all over a canvas.
I guess I have a reflexive contempt for art that privileges artist statements. I just think
I totally
that
agree.
Shouldn't matter, and I don't care. But
I think most people would agree with us on that, though. Now, I think that was very important 50 years ago, and I think the vast majority of appreciators of art would fall in line with what you just said today.
Yeah. But also, then you talked about credibility, and I think credibility is a whole separate question. But then, as far as painting goes, and certainly as far as the relationship between painting and poetry, I don't know, but it seems like the question has more to do with well, you don't have to do anything because there's no god of art or god of poetry, but it seems to have helped some people achieve better effects with their other work that they did more conventional work to begin with. But maybe you don't have to. I don't know. Alice, you did have a...
Yeah, I want to hear Alice on this, because I think implicit in the question is almost a sense that there are two aspects of understanding, mastering formalism. One of it is, does that help you write free verse? And two, does the fact that you have some expertise in formalism demonstrate that the free verse you're writing is more of a choice and less of a necessity? I think that the should implies both of those, and I would love to hear you on either one or both.
Yeah, it definitely does imply, you better not just be doing it because you can't do the other one.
Right.
But I get that. I completely get that. I was thinking about Maya. When she said that, something in me really wanted to disagree with her. But 10 years ago, I definitely would have wholeheartedly agreed with her. So I've come around a little bit on this. I was watching yet more Paul McCartney content the other night, and he was talking about being taught a particular C chord that he built the song Michelle around. And he was showing it to Rick Rubin. He was saying, it's this, you kind of put your fingers here, and, then this is how it goes. And I don't really know what it's called. And that, to me, sort of seems like where you end up as a free verse poet who doesn't have any knowledge of rhyme and meter is you kind of know that it sounds good, but you can't really explain why. Does it matter that you can't explain why? If it sounds good enough, maybe not. I think it really depends on what your goal is. And yeah, in any question that has should in it is, I'm going to kind of resist that part of the question. But I think you do have to read, and you have to read widely enough and outside of your comfort zone enough that you're at least aware that there are these other tools that you could use, and then you either decide to use them and learn more about them or not. So yeah, it's best that it's a choice, because otherwise you're just stuck in free verse land, right? Because you don't know how to get out. And And because it's Cameron, I want to quote my new favourite person, Jeffrey Hill, back at him, because Cameron's totally corrupted me. Listening to way too much Jeffrey Hill. And he is in the lecture, I think it was the Poetry Policing and Public Order one, where he takes on Caroline Duffy quite a bit. And he says, any poetry written today worthy of being read for anything other than antiquarian curiosity in 50 or 100 years' time will have been written with a kind of savage technical restraint. And I really loved that. Savage technical restraint sounds like something great to aim for. But it doesn't, he's not saying, you got to rhyme. You better have a metrical scheme.
No. A really annoying observation I have, and I'm annoyed by it myself, and I know I'm going to annoy other people, is that I find in, like among free verse poets who have learned the basics of meter and rhyme, which is what mostly what, there are very few formalists who say it should all be formal poetry, but many, if not most, will say, well, you should know the basics. Whether that's true or not, I find that I'm often most irritated by mostly free verse poets who dabble, because the difference. Well, no, I mean, but the difference to me is like the big, because the it's not that I see free verse poems and then I see poems that demonstrate a basic knowledge of meter and rhyme, and I say like, oh, here's the big gap, right? Here's the big change between basic free verse and basic formal poetry. Where I see that's like meaningful difference is between people who have learned the basics of meter and rhyme and people who have written 10,000 lines in meter and rhyme. And it's like Joanna has this pet because among her many precocious exploits as a young person, she was like a decent to pretty good semi-serious junior tennis player, to the point where like her, like one of her wrists is like twice as big as the other today. And she can't stand when we're watching a movie and people play tennis in it. And then very occasionally, it was like, I think there's a movie Red Oaks, or no, a TV show called Red Oaks or something like that we saw, where she was like, oh, that kid actually knows how to play tennis. And it's not like you can, in a workshop or in like a 2-week camp, you can get the basics down, but the real difference is like how intuitive is it? How effortless is it? How, like, it's not like this does scan and this does rhyme, but like, does it just seem as if it just happened to fall onto the page that way? So part of me feels conflicted about this, because I do, like, as spoken word has made meter and rhyme less of like a red flag, I do see a little bit more of that, but it often feels to me, I do see more of that in like poetry that gets popular attention, but it often it sort of pains me in that like extra snotty way of like, yes, this is technically correct, but it doesn't skip along, effortlessly. I did think of like, as with your Paul McCartney example, which I also like, I never know how seriously to take those claims. So like, I don't know, and like, even if he doesn't know what it's called, like he clearly knows it in a pretty deep way. Like Derek Walcott claimed that he didn't know how to scan, which seems like preposterous, but also maybe he cultivated a version of that was true, which like obviously he understood meter profoundly, but he sort of decided not to deal with it in a certain way and only to deal with it in his own terms. Yeah, but I think you're right. Like, finally, if the question is, this sounds good, but do I know what it's called? And like, who cares if you know what it's called? Does it sound good?
I don't know if that's satisfying to Cameron at all, but I hope it is.
I don't know. I don't think anything any of us is going to say it will satisfy Cameron like beyond like the length of maybe an episode. He's a very hungry young man. All right. Do we want to ambush one another with surprise questions?
Yes.
I have one for Alice.
Okay.
Oh.
So I I've recently been listening to a lot of Poetry Says. I've been going to your
Oh,
backlog, and
thank
I've
you.
really enjoyed it. I've really I've learned a lot, and it's entertaining, and I could not more highly recommend it to all the Slee Ricket listeners out there. It does lead me to wonder, though, if you see yourself as the same person on Slee Rickets as you are on your own podcast. Like if there's a both if there's a different role you're playing, but also if there's a different like version of yourself that you are performing on this podcast versus that one. It seems like it's slightly different, but I don't know if I can, fully figure out the way that you're processing it. Also, you're very generous with your time with Slee Rickets, and I'm curious how you see in the podcasting world how the two podcasts fit together or are at tension with one another, or just in your own mind how they relate. So, two questions. One, are you the same you in both podcasts? And two, how do you conceive of the role of both in your life?
Wow. Well, they're definitely two different characters for sure. And that I'm trying to bring them a bit closer together because I definitely prefer the Slee Ricketts Alice. She's a lot more fun to be around. But and when I first discovered this show, it was painful because I was like, damn it, this guy's out there making this incredible shit, and oh god, I got to change my whole thing. So yeah, I'm so glad that like it's I get to be here and like talk to you guys, and that I'm like it's giving me a sense of freedom on Poetry Says to try new things and to just like stop worrying about sticking to some kind of formula that I came up with 6 years ago. Yeah, so I'm trying to kind of, and in both cases just trying to be myself, but obviously that's hard because of the embarrassment thing. And then, oh goodness, I have forgotten the second part of your question because it is quite
How
late.
do you see the role of the two podcasts in your life? Is Yeah, I can ask follow-ups, but I wonder if that
Yeah.
question has any meaning to you without my being more specific.
Well, I feel quite like I don't know, like I want to say inspired, but then I think that Matthew will just like feel that he'll just hate that. But yeah, I feel like I've had to lift my game, and I've wanted to lift my game. I started making the show more regularly, and that felt so good, and it felt like it started to get this momentum that felt really great, and having to challenge myself every week to come up with something is like it's occasionally quite exhausting, but it's pushed me to think a lot harder about so many different things that I never would have considered before. I had gotten very lazy and very stale, and so I really appreciate you listening to the earlier stuff. There are good episodes in there for sure.
Yeah,
I feel
there
like
are.
I'll give you a top 10. But yeah. So yeah, Matthew's my nemesis, and
Good.
Your nemesis and your
Yeah.
inspiration.
yeah, so whatever.
Yeah. It's good to have a nemesis. How should we rotate? Because I can also gang up on Alice, or should we shake it up?
Why don't I
Yeah.
ask you one now,
Okay,
and then so we'll take turns saying, best case, what is Slee Ricketts in 5 years?
Oh God, that's like the question you're asking. What every adult has asked me my entire life, and I've never had an answer to, which is
Well, that's why I'm forcing you to do it on mic.
where do you see yourself in 5 years, or what do you see? What do you
Yeah,
want?
but see yourself as different. I mean, the the show is dealing with different permutations and combinations. Do you have 100,000 listeners and you're selling ads in 5 years? Ideally, do you have, poets whom you've admired your whole life on the show? Ideally, is it the exact same as it is now? Like, what do you, when you close your eyes and dream, what do you think would be the most fun version of this program in the future?
Yeah, I thought about this not in a 5 year sense, but there is a an episode I'm very excited to put out that I've been editing that it's a little bit out of order because I've got a few in the can, but it's the most recent one, Brian, you and I recorded, which is definitely the most like alienating. But
the religion one?
Yeah, it's about religion sort of. And I was thinking about like, I want to do an intro where I talk about a couple things, one of which is a poem, partly because I think it's a poem that has to do nicely with what we talk about and is funny and good, but also partly because I know that a significant number of people come and listen to this because they want to listen to a poetry podcast, and so I recognize that, but I also don't want to stop having interesting conversations that I like to have because people don't want to hear things that are not poetry. So I feel like the two things I really want are that it's still interesting to make and it's still fun to listen to. And in a way, like there are poets I'm excited to have on. And I had a correspondence recently with A. Stallings, who's definitely one of my favorite living poets. I mean, Josh Megan, genuinely, who like reached out to me, is generally one of my like top 5 living poets. Like I definitely am excited to talk to them and people I've already talked to again. But I'm less excited for, like, I always feel ambivalent about like meeting people I admire, not because I think like Chuck Palahniuk has that insane thing where he says like, I don't want to meet any good writer I admire more than once, because I know if I spend more than one meeting with them, at some point they're going to fart, and then that person will have farted in my presence. Like, which is like juvenile, but also is like a juvenile exaggeration of a thing that people do seriously say about people they admire, which is like, oh, I don't want to be disappointed, or I don't want to see the foibles, or I don't really care. I mean, I assume the people I admire as artists are mediocre as human beings. That's not remarkable. I don't expect, like, if I could have a fucking dinner with Shakespeare, I wouldn't expect to be able to get more out of that than I get out of reading him. I mean, I wouldn't say no, but like, I don't know that. And I often find that like we talked a little bit about this, Brian, and I know Alice, I think we have as well in a different context, but like the best talkers are not necessarily like the people who are you most admire outside of that. Like talking is there was an article I am totally, by the way, ready to cancel the Twitter account, but Joanna really wants it to still exist, so I'm letting it still exist for now, but I just find it very tiresome. But one of the last things I posted on there was an article this woman wrote about how writers shouldn't talk, which is like a dumb simplification, but like her larger point I think was totally correct, which is that like talking is a skill. Writing is a skill. They're different skills. Some people have both, many do not. And like that's just true. Like the people who are good at having fun conversations are the people who are good at having fun conversations. And that's totally separate from whether they are well known or whether they are good writers or whether they're anything else. And there plenty of people have plenty of those things. But
implicit in what you're saying, are you suggesting that having impressive, important, big deal poets on your podcast might lead to a worse podcast?
Definitely. I think it definitely could. And
it definitely has done that for me.
Yeah. Okay. So, right. I mean, so the thoughtful, smart person observation that a couple people have given me is you do the same thing you do when you're editing a magazine, which is you reserve some space for the biggest names you can get in order to bring in audience and achieve prestige. And then that kind of buys you the space and time to put out just the stuff that you like. And I get that, and I think that's reasonable. I also kind of just only want to do the stuff I like. So, which is to say, like, there are also prominent people who are really good to talk to. Like, you know, one of the most prominent people I've had on the show was Mary Jo Salter, and her audio sucked, but she was great. Like, she was I edited very little of that conversation. She was just like really fun to talk to. So, I mean, that can totally coincide. It just is, they're just different considerations. So I I would love never to sell ads, though I would also love to, break even from it. So we'll see. We'll see. Like ideally, I think if we're talking ideals, then I would build up the Substack a little more and then not worry about selling ads. The whether we are officially selling ads or not, chess.com should definitely be paying us by now. Yeah, I mean, I want to still enjoy making it and find it interesting and get to like read weird things that I don't totally know what I think about, and then chew them up with people I like talking to, as well as some on my own. And then I want people to enjoy listening to it. I never want it to be somebody's homework, right? I never want it to be like, oh God, I really got to listen to that. Like, no, please don't. No, just delete it. I just want people to enjoy it. So it's hard for me to imagine. It's always been hard for me to imagine myself in 5 years doing it in any moment of my life, doing anything in any way. But that's my hope for it, like next month.
Good answer.
Yeah. All right. Alice, you want to fire first, or shall I?
I can.
All right.
I have the same question for both of you.
Okay.
Because I think I've pieced together, I don't think you guys have ever properly explained this, but I think I've pieced together that you used to work together as teachers? Or maybe at a clothing store.
Oh, different friend. Yeah. Different friend. I worked at a clothing store, Brendan, who's
Okay.
a listener and subscriber and yeah, a very old and good friend. We worked in clothing together for
I met that guy once.
Yeah. Really genuinely great.
Good guy.
He
Good
is
guy.
the friend
Handsome.
all
He's
of my
handsome.
friends and wives like. He's the person everybody meets and thinks like, oh, you must be a decent person after all because you're friends with Brendan. Yeah.
Good looking guy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what I wanted to know was, I just want to hear a story from each of you about like your favorite time hanging out.
So Matthew bought me my first pair of nice jeans. So we,
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the way Matthew and I know each other is we started the same year in our MFA program at the Johns Hopkins Writing Seminars. It's a 2-year fully funded program, and it's fully funded because you teach all 4 semesters where you attend school. So although we took different classes from each other, I took fiction workshops and writing classes. Matthew took poetry workshops and poetry classes. We both taught the same introduction to fiction poetry 1 and 2 courses at Johns Hopkins to undergrads at the time. So we spent a bunch of time together in this, like initially in these like how to teach introduction to fiction poetry according to their guidelines. And then because there were only 20 of us, and we all were in the same program, at least theoretically, we met the people we liked and hung out with. Matthew and I ran a reading series together for a year of those 2 years. But mostly Matthew was young when I met him. I mean, you were 22, something like that.
23.
Well, he presented as 22, so he seemed especially young. But he was very certain, in the way that you could imagine a younger version of Matthew might be. And I found it very, very, very off-putting and very, very charming. So I spent some time with him, and I don't know, 6 months in, he sort of looks at me and he's like, "You seem to care about the clothes that you wear." And I thought, that's a strange way to ask a person a question. I can't imagine where he's going with this, but sure, what the hell? I do, Matthew. I do care about the clothes that I wear, I said. And he's like, "Your pants are kind of wide." And I said, I guess they are. The type of pants I've decided to buy for myself are relatively wide pants. It's 2005 or 7 or 8 or whatever it was, and that's one of the styles of pants that people wore in
Brian
that
was
year.
a skater. He
goes,
yeah.
"Have you ever thought about wearing like less wide pants?" I'm like, "All right, what are we doing here?" He's like, "Just like what? You don't need to give me any money. Just like, what is your waist size?" So I told him, and the next day he comes with by far the best fitting, coolest pair of pants I'd ever owned in my life. The man bought me pants, and I wore it. And I'm like, "Oh, look at this!
I look so much better, more reasonable now. My legs aren't like clown suit MC Hammer pants. These fit the contours of my body. And it was my now wife, then girlfriend. It was before she broke up with me, and then we got back together. I met, she visited, and she's like, where did you, she's like, for the last 3 years, I've been hoping somebody would swap out your clown pants for something more reasonable. How did this happen? And I said, Matthew Smith. And he said, keep that man in your life, he said. And here we are 20 years later.
Here you are wearing a SLEERICKETS t-shirt.
And my pants have gotten thinner and thinner to the point where I no longer have circulation to my
get that man out of your life. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm wearing the tight pants and the SLEERICKETS t-shirts, and I am a man. I am the sculpture that Matthew has chiseled away for all these years.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
I take full responsibility. Those pants bought me a lot of credit with Alex. I got really cashed in on those pants with her. Yeah, I mean, my like shortest, nicest clothing related anecdote with Brian.
Why clothing related?
Why does it have to be clothing related?
It doesn't have to be, but it happens to be sort of vaguely. We taught one semester in classrooms more or less right next to each other, and so because I was smoking probably like 2 packs a day at that point. I was smoking a cigarette before class, and he came out to hang out with me. And as I now understand, as somebody who doesn't smoke anymore, probably to like enjoy the secondhand a little bit, which I certainly do whenever I'm around someone who smokes. And we were talking out there, and I was wearing a tweed jacket and smoking voraciously in the like last 1 minute before our class started, and a big white fluff of ash landed on my shoulder, and Brian very tenderly reached over and wiped it away. And it turned out that was not a piece of ash. It was a big, white, wet glob of bird shit. And then he had bird shit all over his hand. And then it was time to go into class. And and he said, well, we've got to go to class. And I said, well, you got to go wash your hands. And he said, no, I don't want to be late. And so he walked into class with bird shit all over his hand, and he taught, he's just very cheerfully. He was just like, I can handle having bird shit on my hand and teaching a class. And it seemed very characteristic of him.
I really don't like being late.
He was not grinning, but wincing in pain at the possibility that he was going to be late. I can't remember if I've told the horrible story about us accidentally breaking up our friend's live-in boyfriend long-term relationship over a dumb joke at a bar once.
No. That sounds like
do you remember this, Brian?
I think I do, but I want you to go first to make sure I don't accidentally tell a different story where we've broken up our other friends' long-term relationship.
It was part of why it's so memorable is it introduced me to a new type of person that I hadn't at the time fully. Like, I remember in college having experience with this girl that I, in retrospect, like, boy, I should have seemed like a real creep. But I was studying late night at a diner and working on a paper I had to write for class the next morning, and a pretty girl in cat eye glasses was extremely drunk at the diner and wandering around by the door. And I said, "Do you need a ride home?" Out of nowhere as a total stranger. And she said, "Yes, please," which is, terrible judgment all around. But we had a weird evening together. I did write my paper, didn't do anything indecorous, but I remember, like, it was like one of the first times, like, talking to her a little further as she sobered up, I realized, like, oh, she's not a smart librarian. She's just wearing cat eye glasses. And so this was sort of the experience we had with this guy, where we had like a truly brilliant woman who was in our program, who was a writer and a critic, and went on to do very impressive scholarly work and get a PhD in Spanish literature.
Tenure track professor, I think.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, like, very successful scholar. She was dating this young hip guy who had lived with her, I think, in New York or in Chicago. It was like some major, I think it was New York. And they lived in an apartment together in Baltimore. He came along with her, and
You understand the story is not flattering of us.
No, it's terrible.
No.
We are
Yeah,
monsters
okay.
in this story. We're terrible in this story.
All right. As long as you
it's one
understand
of
that we're not the hero of this this tale.
It's one of the most like discreetly bad things I've done. And I
Yeah.
did it genuinely by accident, but not by trying to be a good person, by trying to be a mild dick and then accidentally being a huge dick. So we did our readings at this bar called The Den, which was trying to be what my New York friends told me was the offensive term, a bridge and tunnel club. It was trying to be a bridge and tunnel club in like Midtown Baltimore and like above a Indian restaurant in a way that didn't make any sense. And the guys apparently like sold a lot of drugs, and that was like it was an insane place to do any kind of business. We
threw a hell of a reading series. We got funding for it, which meant that
it was we should talk about that reading series because there are I think it had some highs and some lows. I think it was some of the best and worst social choices we've made, social and aesthetic. But so we were waiting outside. This bar had drink promotions all the time. One night of the week it was half off drinks. One night it was 2-for-1 drinks, which is the same as half off drinks. And then one night it was coin flip Tuesday, which is you flip a coin as to whether you pay for your drink. Statistically, also identical to half off drinks and 2-for-1 drinks. It's all the same promotion, but it depended on which night of the week it was. And so the guy came we were sitting outside. I was smoking again, and this guy who was dating our friend came up and he said, "So it's coin flip day." And we said, no, it's 2-for-1 day or half off to whatever it was. And he said, "Oh, I really thought it was coin flip day today." We're like, "No, that's Tuesday." But then we decided to do a bit where the bit would be, do you want to relate the bit?
No.
Because I think I was doing an impression of like what I thought was you, but I was being, instead of being like light and funny, I was being a jerk. So tell Alice what the bit was.
I'm gonna mess it up. But I said I don't get embarrassed about stuff. Me being mean in the past is, I think, what embarrasses me the most. So this is a full circle. I'm not going to be able to tell the story.
I really didn't think we were being mean. I thought he was laughing with us. Like, you know those times where like people are laughing at you, but you think they're laughing with you? We were laughing with him.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, we were laughing at him. So the bit was, hey, you know what you should do? You should go up there and say, "I want to flip a coin for my drink." And when the bartender says, "No, that's tomorrow, tonight's half off drinks," you say, "God damn it, I want a coin flip Tuesday. I refuse. This is an outrage." And you knock over whatever's on the bar, and you slam your fist down, and you scream at the guy, and you don't take no for an answer. And he said, yeah, I should really do that. I should not take no for an answer and say coin flip Tuesday or death. And we were all talking in such a sarcastic tone of voice, and he was joining in this sarcastic tone of voice, and it was so obviously a silly, sarcastic bit. And then he came down several minutes later, and he was sweaty, and his face was sort of white.
No. It's like that did not go well.
He said, well, I won't say her name. He said, "My girlfriend got so mad at me when I slammed my fist on the bar and screamed at the bartender and the man at Quid Flip Tuesday."
I don't know if we can recover from this. It's really a bad idea. Why did
you tell me to do this?
I thought this was like the kind of thing that poets like to do. Why did you tell me to do that? And he was so sad. He was so defeated.
And that was in the moment I realized, like, oh, he wears like hipster clothes and he talks in a sarcastic voice and he dates like a cool, beautiful, like brilliant young woman. But like, he's a dum-dum. Like, he's just a dumb man.
He thought that we would. He thought
like probably like a genuine nice man, but like he was like, "Oh, my girlfriend's smart friends told me to go do this." When in Rome,
so heartbreaking.
And she broke up with him last night, and that night they broke up, and that was the end of their relationship.
That night they broke up, and they'd lived together. They'd been together for years. But also our perspective as like the catalyst. But then like we didn't get to see it, so from our perspective, it was just like us doing a bit about how you should pretend to be furious that they're not letting you flip a coin for your drink, which makes no sense. Like why would
Why would anybody really be furious? Why would you pretend to be furious? Why would that be a funny?
The two promotions
like,
are the same promotion.
It doesn't make any sense. So, but being like, well, that was like a funny way to kill like a minute 30 doing like a silly comic bit, and we're still talking out there. Then he comes down all like bedraggled, like what? Like that wasn't a good idea. Why did you? Why did you tell me to do that?
Why did you
really
tell
in
me
hot
to
water
do
now
that?
with my
It's
old
like-
lady? Oh Jesus!
Can you offer us absolution, Alice?
Yeah,
or just condemnation?
No, like, what the hell? Why did you tell me to do that? Dude, like, you don't have to do things that people tell you to do. What the fuck?
It was a total like when in Rome. He was like psyching himself up. You know, he's like, well, that's what's good. That's
No,
Baltimore. You go and yeah.
There's a good reason why she broke up with him.
Which then made me think, like, did his dumbness not reveal itself until now?
No, but maybe there was cumulative dumbness, and that night was
Okay,
just
this was the straw.
final straw.
So here's my question that I don't think I've ever asked you, Brian. What do you imagine he thought would happen? Like, what was the ideal reaction that, like, would he be, like, carried out of the bar on the back of a chair and they'd be cheering him?
Shoulders. Everybody's like taking off their shirts and waving them around like a helicopter above their head. Like, you did it. Someone's like flashing the lights on and off. Like,
I've been wanting to do that for years.
Ender. Yeah, I think he realized that he maybe wasn't a great match for his long-term girlfriend, and that she had been living with this different sort of person that allowed her to become a more fully fledged version of herself. So I think he thought, this is going to be a way that I'm going to show her that I can do all this stuff.
Like, he wasn't sabotaging it. Like, he was trying to fully win her over. Like, he was trying to really make her take him seriously.
Like this is like, finally I've discovered the secret that will like really make her see that I'm, that I can hang with her and her new crowd. So I think he thought that she would see him and be like, you are the man for me. You can treat this bartender poorly in a theatrical manner.
But you don't think, because I don't think, the one thing I feel better about is I don't think he believed that it would be taken as a bit. Like, I think he thought people would be excited for him, but I don't think
that
he thought
was
it
gonna
would be like a joke, that he was like...
No, I think he thought that he was going to go treat the bartender like shit.
Yeah,
and that
the bartender would be like put in his place and would let him flip a coin.
We genuinely wanted the bartender to be treated like shit, which again is so... I mean, even in my younger, darker day, I would never want to abuse of the guy serving us drinks. Like, that doesn't make any sense. I think that he thought being really mean to the bartender would be cool in that environment.
Yeah, we were wearing leather jackets and still smoking cigarettes, but like running combs through our hair and telling him to like go. Like, we were like the mean cool guys telling him to go be a mean cool guy so he could join our gang.
Right.
Yeah.
Beat up the stranger so he could join our gang.
Oh God. Yeah. So that's one of the worst things. That's the worst thing we collaborated on.
I think that might be the morally worst. That definitely was not the worst thing we've ever collaborated on.
Oh, like as art? No.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we've done worse.
That's in the cosmic sense, that's the worst thing.
But that I think the question was, how'd you guys know each other? You worked at a store or something?
Yeah. So that was a thorough answer. I have questions for y'all. We've also been doing this for 1,000,000 hours. I don't know, Alice, it's like 3,000 o'clock down there.
We've come this far,
all right. Okay.
Yeah.
So part of your project with Poetry Says, which I didn't realize was an official part of it until recently, is that you don't interview the same poet twice. And you've broken that rule a couple times in different ways, but like you see, and like also the way you talk about some of your poets, or like you were an extremely good host, like in all senses. You're good at hosting a podcast, but you are also a very welcoming and generous host, and you you seem to want your guests to like truthfully reveal themselves. You also, though, like there's this Catholic quality to what you do where like it's not just that this is not a podcast about like wagging your finger and shouting annoying opinions at the world as I do. It's also that like you don't even only want to interview poets you like. Like you want, like you're like doing this sort of representational thing where you're like here are poets who are there in Australia. No, but like my thought is like 5 years from now, you want to have interviewed every poet in Australia would be my guess. Not whether that's actually possible or not is another question. But like there is a profound inclusivity to what you're doing that I find both like infuriating and fascinating. And it makes me wonder, like, so I was trying to think about Adrian Mataika. Like, the easiest thing in the world is to make fun of, like, the new guy who's got some big important job, and I'm sure is going to do weird things to embarrass himself, and he's already, like, tweeted some dumb things and whatever. But, like, I was trying to genuinely think about what it would be like to take on his job, which is he's the new editor of Poetry Magazine. And I thought, like, I would never want that kind of job. I would never want to be in charge. I don't really like being in charge of anything. But I have some idea of maybe how I might approach it. I have some, and I don't like feel bad about having my own taste or even imposing my own taste. But I'm curious for you because you are, as my dad says, that Alice can't say a bad word about anyone. My question for you is like, if you were given an iron fist with which to rule Australian poetry, like if you were given a position of like true arbitership, like what would you arbitrate? What would you do? Like, would you just do, yeah, like how would you make those choices?
Well, I am making those choices, but they're not visible because I'm sort of quietly sorting through stuff in the back and going, okay, well, I won't make too much of a big deal about that because I have no idea how to approach that work, and I don't think that that's a very nice person, and you know, so there's people that I am ruling out.
Well, maybe that's another. I mean, so in your position of great arbitership in Australian poetry, what are the secret criteria? What are the impression is that you are truly like interviewing every significant poet in Australia one by one. What are you actually doing?
What am I actually doing? Oh man, I don't even know if I have a good answer to that. Like,
well, from like you also there are two halves of the podcast, right? Like you do these like fascinating solo shows, which is a different thing. But like, are you not really just saying like if you are writing poetry and have achieved like X level of significance, even if it's in whatever measure, you're eligible, or is there something else making those distinctions?
I mean, you did just say that's not a good person. Is that part of what weighs for or against somebody?
Yeah, it's funny making it sound like I'm weighing for and against. Yeah, I mean, there are some real fucking assholes, and I don't want to talk to them. I have ended up speaking to one or two because people asked me to, and I have a great deal of trouble saying no. That's something that I'm working on. But I think, I don't know, this doesn't really answer your question, but in terms of like what I'm doing more broadly, I have never forgotten the feeling of moving here to Melbourne from the arse end of nowhere and feeling completely left out and alienated, and like nobody would talk to me. I would rock up to readings and just like flop sweat and leave, not having spoken to anyone. And I remember that feeling so well. And now when I go to readings, you know, people do know me and they say hi, but there are other people at the reading that nobody is talking to. And I really just want to demystify the whole thing, because there is nothing special about anyone. Some people write beautiful work and some people write shitty work that gets recognized, and but nobody deserves like a special dispensation. Everyone's just a human being, and I feel like the advantage of getting somebody's voice is that you can hear that. And it's really funny because a recent guest that I had on, I'm getting messages like, that guy, we hate that guy. Because the thing is, you can kind of hear it, right? Like you can kind of hear the like the positioning and the sort of fakery that's going on there. There was a interviewer, a very famous interviewer over here called Andrew Denton, and he had a show called Enough Rope, and I think about him a lot.
Enough Rope.
Enough
That's a
rope to
great
hang
name
yourself.
for it.
Yeah. And Denton's my model. He was mostly very quiet. He would ask one or two questions. He would just let everybody just hang themselves. God, that just made it sound like the worst thing ever. Yeah, I don't know.
No, but that's
like,
Sounds good to me. Yeah.
yeah.
So maybe because I think what you're saying about demystifying poetry, like this is whoever you're interviewing, the same, your real like ideal listener is still sort of the intimidated newcomer.
Absolutely. That's who I want to talk to. Yeah.
And so then without naming names, what do you, apart from just sort of like pure representation of like, this is who this person is, do you have feelings about, because there's also a difference, as we've said, between somebody who's fun to listen to talk in an interview and somebody who does good work. Do you find yourself having different hopes for or goals with the interviews of poets you either, where like you have a strong feeling about the work itself, whether or not that has to do with because I know you've interviewed people whose work you love, and I also feel pretty confident you've interviewed people whose work you really don't love.
Yeah.
What are you hoping those interviews do?
If I really love it, I'm hoping that I can open that work up to more people, and more people will fall in love with this person. I'm hoping that they will be able to communicate their work well, and that they can stand behind it, and they won't just mumble and say a lot. And I will cut all that stuff out for them.
Right.
And if I don't like their work, it's back to that enough rope thing. I'll try to ask questions that maybe get them to reveal that they are maybe they're not on a solid ground as everybody else thinks, because that's what the newcomer is experiencing at those readings. They're coming and they're seeing this person who is so celebrated and has so much status, and I want them to know that that person may well be faking it. And even if they're not faking it, there's nothing special about what they're doing that means that you can't dislike it.
I have a really diabolical question for you then.
Okay.
Do you find yourself editing some guests more generously than others?
I mean, almost certainly, yeah. I'm just trying to think of an example.
Like there's some where you feel like I really want them to like this person, and maybe this person's a little clumsy on the mic, and so I just want to like really show this person at her best.
Yeah.
Presumably that happens sometimes, but is there, I wouldn't say that you've like done mean gotcha tricks to anybody, but like do you find yourself having the opposite feeling ever when editing?
I have edited out things where people have definitely put their foot in their mouth and said something that could really fuck them up, and I've just taken it out. Because there's an exchange when we're talking that's about, people forget, they forget that it's going to go out into the world, and I think that's not the right thing to do. And particularly older white male poets will say some stuff, and I'm like, you can't, and I just don't want to be the.
But that's a universal ethical standard for you, irrespective of who you're speaking to.
I think so, unless I felt like somebody came in and like really had an axe to grind, and that was their, they wanted to be like that. Yeah, but if they just accidentally said something
too. Like you don't want people to be accidentally blowing themselves up with some offhand
No.
comment. Yeah.
No. But it's funny, like, and you said at the start that you sort of find this Catholic approach infuriating, and I'm interested in that. Like, it seems as if people would like me to be a bit meaner.
I don't necessarily want you to be meaner, but I find it interesting that you are that you're not more like the thing I said to you when we were talking about like when I couldn't believe that you generally speaking didn't want to speak to the same person more than once. And the thing I said to you was like, that's like if your sex life was all one night stands. Like you never get to learn anything. You never get to like say like, oh, that worked nicely. Let's do that again. Like, you know, it's like, I'm just start from scratch with everybody, but also you're not, you're not saying like, I whether it's like I want to speak to these people that I really admire, I really admire their work, or I want to speak to these people I really have a disagreement with, or I wanted to speak to you because in some cases it's like I read this particular thing and it's brought you to my mind, but you see, like the impression I got was that you feel a duty that transcends your opinions or your tastes. Is that accurate?
Only to a degree. Like there are plenty of poets here, and I'm nowhere near getting to the end of the list of the ones I even want to talk to. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I part of what I like about Poetry Says is I never know what I think of it, and every episode's a little different. I mean, there are the interview episodes are very different, especially now from the solo episodes.
Yep.
And I like you better than I like most of the people you interview.
Yep.
But I think they do complement each other nicely. Like, there are definitely... I feel more tenderly toward the solo episodes, but I get more, like, stimulated and, like, reminded of things and angry and interested by the interviews. Like, I was live tweeting your most recent interview just to you on WhatsApp. Like, writing you in all caps about things you were saying.
Yeah, that was great. That was great to wake up to. Yeah.
All right, so Brian, I have a few versions of this. Maybe I'll ask you my like weird masculinity question later. But because I have as I told you, I had the one listener who was down on Brian, but like most people, and most notably my dad, but like definitely like my dad and my wife, and like most people I talk to about episodes at all, like most of their feedback is like, how come you were so dumb on that conversation you had with Brian and he was so smart? So my question is like,
That's not true. People don't say that.
Well, they don't say dumb and smart, but they're like I guess my question is like, in the Platzerist coup, what does SLEERICKETS become a podcast about? Because the other thing is like, I also very often make you read things that you don't want to read, and like, or that you are resistant to, or like my hope is that it becomes interesting and we find some things in it, but like I often impose things on you, or I like drag a poetry angle into it, or I make you read philosophical papers. But what would the Brian SLEERICKETS be like? First, like, what would the logo become, and then what would the podcast be about?
Well, it would definitely be less Nazi-ish. I'm not sure what's going on with
just Comic Sans instead of black letter Gothic.
Yeah, that Gothic font with the skeleton. Not my aesthetic. It's beautiful. It's just speaks against the millennia of my people suffering. I think what I'm so amazed by is your willingness to let me on the show every few weeks, because like it's my fear for you is that you're running two parallel shows. There's SLEERICKETS, a poetry about podcasts and other intractable problems, and then there's you and I yell at each other about stuff. And my fear is that I'm driving away your core constituency. That people, somebody recommends SLEERICKETS to somebody, and it's like, what is this? Like, why are these two people yelling at each other about the philosophical paper and like sports criticism. Like it doesn't make any sense. So my hope is that I draw something out of you that is honest, an honest part of you, and that your audience enjoys enough to put up with me. But again, if however many listeners you have, I'm sure every single one either strongly prefers the traditional episodes and despises or puts up with me, or strongly prefers me, although I can't imagine that being real.
That's a lot of people.
I don't know. My hope is that I'm not dragging down your numbers. If
I
it's
feel the
for my
same
podcast,
way.
But you feel the same way about Brian? Just talk as if
No,
Brian's
no,
not
no.
here. Just imagine he's not
No,
here.
I hang out for the Brian episodes. I'm like, yes, it's a fucking Brian episode. So good. But yeah, no, I feel the same. I'm like, yeah, I hope that, I'm sure people just skip the Alice ones. I'm not in
No,
the
you're
title anymore.
you're the
though.
least divisive person involved in the show. You're less divisive than I am. Like everybody likes Alice.
Really?
yeah, I of course, no, everybody likes Alice. I bet you don't think a quarter of your listeners skip the me episodes.
They might, but then like that's again my thing with the show is like I want to do this because it's fun and I enjoy talking to you, and I think the episodes we do are entertaining. Like
I agree.
yeah, so I think
just
like
don't.
I
mean,
like it too much to not do it if it's my fucking
So
podcast, you know.
is your question what I would do to SLEERICKETS if I were in charge of SLEERICKETS, or is your question what would a podcast that I hosted be like? Or did I misunderstand?
They can be
entirely?
the same. They can be the same. I mean, I
wouldn't call my podcast SLEERICKETS.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
a
Okay. So
terrible
you change
for
the
a
name and the
podcast.
logo, and would it be Sassy Sports Talk with Brian Platzer, or what would it be?
No, my guess is I would have a like up top a 5-minute monologue of some kind about what I was thinking about that day, and then
You're already starting with like you would have a structure.
I would have a structure. I would. And then I would probably have all the advertiser content. You know what I mean? So that's when I would have the 30-second, 1-minute paid ads where but I would probably deliver them in a sort of in an entertaining way to make sure that people were listening to the ads.
They can
you know,
be like
so
a little
my
personal.
sponsors,
Yeah.
my sponsors were really getting into, getting their bang for the buck. Is that what you're asking? How I would handle the ads? Or you're asking more?
Like you would have ads, you would have a structure,
Yeah.
you wouldn't look like a Nazi show.
No, and
you would have
I would
like
probably,
a title that was a real word.
I would probably have a rotating group of people, each with their own specialty that I have some interest in and some expertise in. So I would probably have like
Carrillo.
probably 2 shows a week or something, and I would have 2 literary people, 2 sports people, maybe just like a general culture person, a politics person, and I would try to get a listenership to have like opinions and feelings about those individuals who probably did what we're discussing professionally, and it could be a way for me to drill deep into my generalist knowledge of culture and politics and sports and art and literature and my asking questions. And I would like all of those conversations to be contentious, to have people disagreeing with each other pretty actively, so people would know that they could come for the personalities, for the camaraderie, and to hear people thoughtfully disagreeing with each other. And I would cap everything at probably 40 minutes.
All
Sounds
right.
great.
So
Make that show.
So yeah, when should we announce that this new show is coming out?
I've got so much to. I have so many jobs. I can't. I wouldn't. But I
So
guess.
which
I mean,
one will
what-
you quit in order to? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the real like guilt that I'm articulating here is clearly I've thought this through, like which I didn't realize the extent to which I've fantasized about this. I spend a lot of time listening to podcasts, and I really enjoy both of your podcasts, especially, but I also sort of silly sports and politics and culture podcasts. And I think that there's a world where if I could not run a tutoring company and not teach and not write novels, I would love to spend time with talking to people about things I care about, but I leave it to the experts. You're both way better at this stuff than I could ever be or would ever be. And I'm happy to have a forum where I can show up and say stuff every once in a while.
Yeah. Well, my dad will be the first to subscribe at the founder level and give you an enthusiastic 1-star review that he then won't be able to figure out
I
how to
love it. The
change.
accidental 1-star review from Dad is the best line from SLEERICKETS yet. But
Yeah,
I'm
that's
actually
unthought
really
of.
embarrassed. So we started with saying, what is the poem that embarrassed you? And I said, not only will that not embarrass me, but nothing will embarrass me. I think my description in like heavy detail of exactly what the Brian podcast would be without missing a beat is I think
And
right
this was
now
a surprise question. This was not.
I think
you
I
did not
am
know this
more
question
embarrassed, but I was so prepared for it. Like it's clear that I've been planning some podcast empire subconsciously because I've never thought this through or said this out loud to anybody before. I am so jealous of both of you and yearning to play on your level that I've been subconsciously developing all of this. I am now more embarrassed than I have been in years.
You just got to do it. You'd be great.
Yeah.
Go for it, mate.
Go for it, but only if it won't. If it won't detract from my time with you.
I mean, also my severe neurological disorder means that if I do talk to you for 3 hours, I can't do anything else for the rest of the day, which is hard. So it's not just that I would have to give up one job. I would have to not interact in a positive way with my friends and family either. I will have to go hibernate now. So hibernate we will.
Yeah.
Alice to bed, Brian to bed, Matthew to whatever you do outside of bed or in bed. You can be in bed for as many hours as you'd like.
Girls and dog.
Follow-up series of questions about Matthew in bed.
I can't. I'm like, I hate the idea of like working in bed or reading it, like, unless I'm trying to go to sleep. Reading, I hate it. Drives me crazy. Yeah.
Do you have a king size bed?
We have a queen size bed. My wife and I are both 6'2".
You need a
king size bed.
Yeah.
It's fucking insane. And the dog.
My wife and I are tiny people. We have a king size bed. It's like sleeping separately. It's the best fucking thing in the world. I can't.
I kind of am
Alice, are you a king size bed person? Are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to be touched at night. I mean, unless we're touching, I don't want to be. I don't want to be accidentally touched.
No, I kind of want there to be like sex and sleep to be segregated. Like having sex.
I like it
with somebody
simultaneously.
nice,
I want them to be asleep when I'm doing it.
But I want I would like.
I don't want them to know it happened. I don't want them. I don't.
Oh, I thought you didn't want to know what happened. You just wanted to, you wake up and feel wet and confused.
You got it.
Yep. Good. Well,
go
thank you so
team.
much. Yeah. Well done. And we'll be doing one of these every week from now on.
Every 3 days, Alice has to be up until 3 a.m. We have to talk for 4 hours.